Yo, we're back. Let's go.
Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Eric Voss, and with Marvel Studios' latest cast announcement for Avengers Doomsday, some kind of conflict between the 616 Avengers and their allies versus the X-Men from another universe seems to be in the process of being cooked up by Dr. Doom. This March 26th set share announcement confirmed 27 cast members, with Marvel confirming to The Hollywood Reporter and Robert Downey Jr. on Instagram that even more will be announced in the future. And the big highlights of this announcement were the returning Fox-era X-Men actors, especially ones who have never appeared in a Marvel Studios production before. We saw Kelsey Grammer, of course, playing Hank McCoy Beast, who last appeared in the MCU in the post-credits scene of The Marvels, and of course played the role in 2006's X-Men The Last Stand, and a cameo in 2014's X-Men Days of Future Past. And we've seen Patrick Stewart as Professor Charles Xavier, who had appeared in most of the Fox X-Men films and then returned in the MCU in an alternate universe in 2022's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But joining these two, shocking me, are Ian McKellen as Eric Lyncher Magneto, Alan Cumming as Kurt Wagner Nightcrawler, Rebecca Romaine as Raven Darkholme Mystique, and James Marsden as Scott Summers Cyclops. Also part of the mutant group, I guess we should include Channing Tatum as Remy LeBeau Gambit, who returned from The Void in Deadpool and Wolverine. He never played Gambit in any of the Fox-era movies, but he was attached to the character with a Gambit solo movie that went through development hell. But with Ian McKellen, Alan Cumming, Rebecca Romaine, and James Marsden all returning, it's now pretty expected that Marvel Studios will, in the future, announce some other big names from that Fox X-Men era, including Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. We saw him in Deadpool and Wolverine, and we know he's doing this till he's 90, as well as Halle Berry as Aurora Monroe Storm, Famke Janssen as Jean Grey Phoenix, Anna Paquin as Rogue, Elliot Page Kitty Pryde, Sean Ashmore Iceman, Ray Park as Toad, Tyler Mane as Sabretooth, who was also in Deadpool and Wolverine, and Aaron Stanford as Pyro, also in Deadpool and Wolverine. With any number of these characters returning, it's suddenly very important to recap the events of the Marvels post-credit scene, how Deadpool and Wolverine affected the Fox X-Men timeline, and the last time we saw many of these characters in 2014's X-Men Days of Future Past. Really, the question is, what X-Men universe are these X-Men coming from before they face the Marvel heroes from the 616 MCU? I had broken down all of the Fox-era X-Men movies on the New Rockstars channel, and the timeline logic of these films is often a little all over the place. But the last time we saw Ian McKellen as Magneto and James Marsden as Cyclops was in 2014's X-Men Days of Future Past, which was an awesome film and a major crossover event in the X-Men franchise because it was a time travel story that featured both the OG lineup and the new younger cast from X-Men First Class. In the story, Magneto joins the lineup of X-Men as an ally in a post-apocalyptic universe in 2023. Remember when that was the future? When shape-shifting and power-absorbing Sentinels ravaged the planet and enslaved mutants. These X-Men have one final shot to rewrite history, and that is to send Wolverine back in time by having Kitty Pryde displace his consciousness into his younger body in the past in 1973 on a mission to stop Mystique, then played by Jennifer Lawrence, from assassinating Bolivar Trask, inventor of the Sentinels, which then would have ripple affected history to backfire, and the government to use his technology, merging it with the shape-shifting DNA of Mystique and the power-absorbing DNA of Rogue to make these super deadly Sentinels that just perfectly hunt the mutants. They need to change that history, and they end up being successful on this mission, and Wolverine alters the timeline so that his consciousness wakes up in an altered future in the year 2024 at the X-Mansion, where all the X-Men, including those who died in X2 and in X-Men The Last Stand, are alive again, including Scott Summers and Jean Grey. Also kicking around the school is Beast and Rogue and Kitty Pryde and Storm and Charles Xavier. This was really the closest thing to a satisfying happy ending that the OG X-Men ever received in these films. Now, we didn't see these characters in this happy ending, but we could assume that Magneto and Mystique, Rebecca Romaine, were alive somewhere in the background of this world, as well as the Alan Cumming version of Nightcrawler, who was with the mutants at the end of X2. We would just be in some altered future in which things would have gone differently after the first X-Men film, and probably went through the events of X2, but just didn't end with the Alkali Lake Dam bursting and Jean Grey drowning in the water to become Phoenix. The mission was presumably even more successful, and these characters would have lived on another 20 years into the future to become these great X-Men and teachers at Charles Xavier's school, specifically where Cyclops has really cool ruby quartz sunglasses. Now, the 2017 Logan film was set in an even further future after this, a much sadder future, believed to be 5 years after the events of Days of Future Past, making this 2029. Director James Mangold implied implied that the 2017 Logan film was more of a spiritual sequel to the 2013 The Wolverine solo film than it was a sequel to Days of Future Past. But still, in the 2017 Logan film, all of the X-Men are dead at this point, except Wolverine and Charles and Caliban, as a result of an anti-mutant toxin that filtered into the food and water supply, and a specific Westchester incident that killed at least 7 of the mutants at the X-Mansion when Charles Xavier had a psionic seizure. Also in this movie, we learn of a new group of young mutants that had been cloned using the DNA of people like Logan, which includes X-23, played by Daphne Keane. In the Logan film, Charles ends up getting killed by an adult clone of Logan, X-24, and Logan himself eventually dies in a fight with X-24. That's how Logan ends. And it was considered great, and it was considered wonderful, and just a very emotional, fitting end for Wolverine. An emotional end that Deadpool and Wolverine and Marvel Studios was like, nope, till he's 90. And that gravesite actually gets revisited in the beginning of Deadpool and Wolverine, but the main events of Deadpool and Wolverine are actually set in the year 2024 in the X-Men movie timeline, given the numerical designation of Universe 10005. Before Deadpool and Wolverine, that specific number was only assigned to the X-Men movies externally by like reference books and internet forums, and was never verbally called that by any of the characters in the movies or by the filmmakers or the studios. But the Deadpool and Wolverine film took the step to confirm that number in the script of the movie. If it was up to me, I'd have enough time in my day to sit down at a table for a 3-course meal anytime I was hungry, but it's not up to me. And sometimes I just need a meal that is quick, easy. Deadpool films were implied to kind of exist in their own sphere that was adjacent to the X-Men movies, but they were for many years thought to be part of a parody satirical side universe with its own numerical designation, as opposed to a universe that Deadpool shared with the other X-Men movies and their histories. But the third Deadpool film, Deadpool and Wolverine, confirmed that Deadpool's home universe is the same as the Fox Mutants, 10005. And when we see Deadpool working as a car salesman and attending his birthday party in that movie, that is in the year 2024 in Universe 10005. Which we should say is technically the same time when the epilogue scene of Days of Future Past with Wolverine and Charles and Scott and Jean at the mansion is happening. So yes, in the background of the opening act of Deadpool and Wolverine, there is another Wolverine hanging out in the background of that universe with the X-Men. But then in Deadpool and Wolverine, Deadpool gets arrested by the TVA, and Paradox tells him that Wolverine is the anchor being of that universe, and that Wolverine will die in this universe. And he shows Deadpool footage of Logan's death in the 2017 film, but he is showing him footage of events that take place 5 years into the future from where Wade had just left in 2024. He is looking at footage from 2029. And that's because the TVA just looks at all of time as flat. For them, they aren't seeing things 5 years in the future, 5 years in the past. It's all happening at the same time. Like they're watching a movie and fast forwarding to that point. So when Wade steals a Tempad and goes to Wolverine's gravesite, that would be sometime after 2029 because Wolverine's corpse has eroded away. I speculated it's the year 2032 because later in this movie, Wolverine from another universe says that he's been alive for 200 years and Wolverine was canonically born in the year 1832 as James Howlett. Deadpool and Wolverine leaves us with a still intact Universe 10005 that the TVA leader B-15 suggests is stronger than ever by the film's end, since Deadpool found this drunk Wolverine from another universe who ended up being a pretty good fit in 10005. And yes, Deadpool and Wolverine logically ends with there being 2 Wolverines in this universe, both alive at the same time for at least 5 years, but I just assume their paths never cross. But we do know that there is a gap period of 5 years after Days of Future Past where the X-Men are all together, all alive, all in a time closer to our present, where Cyclops has some sick ruby quartz glasses, Charles has a new hover chair, and that is just a 5 solid years of untold X-Men stories that could be picked back up. The reason Marvel Studios references Charles Xavier's line from Days of Future Past in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, just because someone falls and loses their way doesn't mean they're lost forever, is because Kevin Feige considers that 2014 crossover film a critical nexus event that he is using to logically link to his MCU. And I think the reason Marvel Studios went to the effort to numerically designate the Fox X-Men universe as Universe 10005 is because they had already decided to confirm their number for the sacred timeline Marvel Cinematic Universe as 616 in Multiverse of Madness.
Our universe is 838. And we've designated yours 616.
And these two are the 2 numbers they want to be in our heads headed into Doomsday and Secret Wars. Because in Jonathan Hickman's 2015 Secret Wars crossover event, it really is a conflict between what was considered the main Marvel Comics universe, 616, and the Ultimate Comic Universe that started with Miles Morales, numbered 1610. 616 versus 1610. But the issue with the movie universe is Kevin Feige, in the early years, conceived the earlier films as inspired, at least in tone, by the Ultimate Comics. Those were arguably the more popular comics in the early 2000s. The fact that characters were more grounded and often didn't use their superhero monikers and called each other by their first names. The MCU would get away from that over time and find its own voice, but in the live-action MCU, there really is no Ultimate Universe or any kind of comparison to it. The closest thing they would have is the Fox X-Men universe, Universe 10005. So I think they're swapping it in. The question we need answered is about the post-credit scene of the Marvels. In that film, Dar-Benn uses the quantum bands to tear a hole in reality, a rift in space that Monica Rambeau flies through and closes from the other side, leaving her in an alternate universe, where she wakes up in the medical bay of an alternate universe X-Mansion with Maria Rambeau, Binary, and Kelsey Grammer Beast, who references an off-screen Charles Xavier. So Charles is still alive somewhere in this universe. Presumably, lots of X-Men are. Now, this Beast is a bit of a redesign of the character. They do away with the heavy prosthetics that Kelsey Grammer wore in the 2006 and 2014 films. They do a CGI redesign that makes Hank McCoy look more like the character design from the comics and the animation, specifically with the underbite fangs. But now, when I rewatched that scene, I don't think that redesign is enough to conclude that this is a different universe from 10005, the universe from the end of Days of Future Past, even though Beast looks significantly different. I say that because Kevin Feige and his team redesign CGI characters all the time. Hulk in Thor Ragnarok looks quite different from Hulk in 2012 Avengers and completely different from Hulk in 2008's The Incredible Hulk, but canonically they are the same character with the same history. So now I believe that the X-Men universe at the end of the Marvels is 10005, just a few years into the future, after the events of X-Men Days of Future Past, when the X-Men of that universe got in a few solid years of X-Menning, and Charles Xavier is looking out for cosmic anomalies and incursions. The timeline actually works out perfectly, because if this timeline is parallel to the 616 MCU timeline, we would be in the year 2028, because the MCU typically stays 2 years in the future from our timeline. And currently in the MCU, it's 2027 and Daredevil Born Again and Captain America Brave New World. So next year in 2026, it would be 2028 in the MCU, and in the 10005 universe, 2028 would still leave the X-Men 1 year before Logan's death in 2029, and potentially before that Westchester incident that killed many of the mutants in the X-Mansion after one of Charles's seizures. Actually, hey, maybe having that second Wolverine in this universe, Deadpool's friend, for 4 years is what could have helped them avoid an expedited dark fate. And what's potentially really cool about this is this 2028 era 10005 X-Men lineup could be the best X-Men lineup we've ever seen. A live-action version of X-Men the Animated Series or X-Men 97. Now that we're in this restored Days of Future Past future, anything is possible. Cyclops could fire optic blasts that are truly concussive. Beast could have an underbite and walk around shirtless and be even nerdier, saying, "Oh, my stars and garters." But this would also be a lineup where Kurt Wagner Nightcrawler never left and continues to work with the X-Men. Alan Cummings' Nightcrawler stopped appearing in the films due to a number of reasons: a grueling makeup process, the VFX budget for the character's teleportation powers, and ultimately Alan Cumming not enjoying his experience with Bryan Singer. That was a big reason why the character did not return in 2014's Days of Future Past, which was directed by Bryan Singer. So we will see what other names get announced for Avengers Doomsday, but I think that conflict is going to begin with Dr. Doom pitting the 616 MCU with the Avengers and the heroes that we know against the 10005 X-Men universe in its best, truest, most comic accurate form. A universe that we wish we had had the whole time, with the actors from that earlier era that we loved, a lineup that Kevin Feige started his Marvel career with. And the result will be to make viewers like us who watch this movie feel truly torn. Which Marvel universe we would have preferred to have the whole time? Comment down below with your thoughts and your questions about this huge announcement. Follow me at EA Boss and subscribe to all the channels in the New Rockstars Network for breakdowns and news coverage of
I'm gonna have to watch a video on X-Men. I've seen some of the movies, not all of them. I got a basic understanding.